It's a great honour to be able to speak on this conference virtually on the important issue of China's dialogue with the rest of the world. The Centre for China and Globalization has been an important partner, and under the directorship of Dr. Wang Huiyao, it has been a wonderful opportunity in the last few years to have good collaboration with colleagues in China at a time when there have been many very profound and difficult issues that have beset geopolitics. The book, which is being published now, is a series of dialogues between Dr. Wang and various figures, and it's an honour for me to be one of them and to be part of this important book. One of the things that I've been thinking about a great deal as 2022 has proceeded is the issue of what will happen in the world should China's economy overtake that of the United States in growth terms. Of course, there can be debate about whether at that moment will ever really happen. There are always very big issues about whether economic growth continues in places as expected. Some have already argued that, in fact, in terms of purchasing parity, China has already overtaken the United States. However, in growth terms, of course, the economies are still dissimilar. And I believe now that China's economy is something over 2/3 the size of the American economy. And then, according to growth rates, there may be a time in the next 5 or 10 years when it actually overtakes the United States. Regardless of whether that happens, what I have been most interested in the last few months is just the prospect of it happening and its impact in the outside world, in particular Europe and America. It seems to me that we are, in those places, ill-prepared for a world in which number one slot may well go to a non-North European or American power. There has been this assumption that Enlightenment powers with the political systems they have are the ones that necessarily have to be dominant. But that is an assumption. You can have a huge economy, even though your political system may be very, very different to others. That's something that China is proving. Therefore, it doesn't mean that because of the size of your economy, you can make any judgments about, for instance, which political system is preferable for economic growth, whether you have to do certain things in order to have a large economy. The debate about China may be one day becoming number one, certainly in America and more in Europe, has been clouded by this idea that somehow economic force is linked to military force or other kinds of force. It's also about the assumption that China will be in some ways like an emulator or copier of the United States, with its desire often to intervene and to have an almost universal scope to its power. I don't think, too, that that can be necessarily proved. For sure, it seems to me China has strong interests, and you can define those, and they're defined every day by its leaders and analysts and others. But whether you can really say that China wants to emulate the United States and be a power like that, that seems to me to be a step too far. At very best, we can say we don't know at the moment. I think it's very likely from the evidence over the last 30 years that China will be a power which is different to the United States. That difference is the thing that I think unsettles people. It's this issue of China not performing to a certain paradigm. The work of the philosopher in the 1960s, Thomas Kuhn, was about famously paradigm shifts and about how enormous investment is made in one particular framework, and that as it is undercut, disproved, falsified, there is more and more of a kind of inability for many people most invested in the former paradigm to see some kind of transition and the creation of a new paradigm. New paradigms happen all the time. And in many ways, perhaps the most important in global world politics has been that created by China, simply because it has become, with a very different and distinctive political system, the world's second largest economy and, as I said, possibly the world's largest in the next 10 years. The response of much of the Western world, by Western I mean here Northern European principally and North American, has been often to be panicky, to be uncertain, and to really reflect its issues with China back on itself and show, I think, a lack of confidence, which surprises me. it seemed to me only 15 years ago, before the great economic crisis in 2008, that the West had a great deal more confidence that its models were very viable and attractive in terms of politics and economic growth, and that they had to necessarily go with each other. Indeed, in his famous work, Francis Fukuyama, a couple of decades before that, in the early 1990s, in The End of History and the Last Man, argued that it was really about the feelings that people had in democracies which made it different. They felt happier, more contented, more prosperous. Democracy made you happier. Well, I don't think we could be so simplistic today. I'm not saying that democracy doesn't make some people happy, and I'm not saying its alternative doesn't also make some people unhappy. But I don't think that we can make great categorizations. There is no necessary link between your political system and whether you citizens feel happy or not. It may be that the most we can offer is that people across all political systems, as of today, the end of 2022, feel very dissatisfied and unhappy. It's possible, however, that we have to look at something more complicated and say that there are particular groups in particular places, no matter what the political system they're in, that have very variable feelings, and that therefore a simplistic model that tries to impose across all terrains, regardless of culture, social structure, economic growth, is no longer fit for purpose. We have reached a paradigm shift. The Enlightenment philosopher David Hume wrote famously that despite the fact that until today, for instance, certain things happened and certain things followed, there was a possibility that one day in the future, in fact, A would not cause B. That, for instance, the sun would not come up in the morning, or that when you put your hand in water, it wouldn't feel wet. Now, of course, this is, in terms of probability, beyond the calculable. Causation on the whole can reach such a level that you can be beyond certain that things will happen. But it seems to me that in social sciences, it's become much more precarious to make any bold predictions about what kind of models might have real absolute validity, and that David Hume's skepticism is therefore more than ever justified. It is right probably to be very skeptical about whether one political model is really going to be universalizable, although it may well be that all political models do need to undertake reform and revision. It seems to me, therefore, it's important today in this dialogue for us to stress a sense of humility. It seems to me important in dialogue to be open-ended, skeptical, but also be able to encounter strong ideas, arguments, and evidence from others, and to be able to change one's own viewpoint. Flexibility, I think, is really important, particularly as, on the whole, in much of social media and other forms of platforms, the rewards go to those who sound the most convinced, but have the least basis on which to base their convictions. The rise of China and the fact that it has been a challenge for Americans and others is something to me that offers us an opportunity for learning and self-reflection. It is not so much that I am particularly welcoming or hostile to a dramatic change like the one that is likely we're going to see in the next decade. A world where China is number one, to me at least, is a world which doesn't look massively different from the world today. And it probably is a world in which there are more opportunities for thinking about things in a slightly different way. But I am very, very aware of, as I say, the high sense of anxiety and concern, and the ways in which this transfers itself, for instance, into issues about China's influence, military influence, and claims about the desire of China to have influence and impact on others. And there I find that my skepticism grows stronger. We have all learned during the pandemic that our systems are in need of radical correction. We've all learned that we have to cooperate in key areas, whether pandemics, climate change, nuclear proliferation, or sustainable growth. Because if we don't cooperate, we won't achieve anything, and we certainly won't solve the long-term problems. A new form of globalization, I think, will be happening, and that may well have China's role much more enhanced because it will be the biggest economy. Even though in per capita terms, it's still going to obviously be much smaller than America and others. That to me is a world which is one that is perfectly bearable and livable in. And it's good for dialogues like this to show that it's perfectly possible to have reasoned civil discussion and debate and learning from each other inside and outside China. And that's the important mission that the organization and Dr. Wang and his colleagues support. Thank you very much.